You're listening to the Big Three of B2B Leadership podcast with Mike Faherty, where world-class business leaders share their secrets for personal, organizational, and market growth. Gain powerful insights from industry leaders that have been tested by the fire.
Well, welcome to the Big Three of B2B Leadership, where we invite industry leaders to share their insights on personal and professional development, developing and maintaining operational excellence in an organization, and of course, expanding your company's position in the marketplace. My name is Mike Faherty. I'm your host. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Jenny Vance. Jenny is an entrepreneur, technology growth advisor, and sales development expert based out of Indianapolis. Jenny has spent nearly 20 years leading sales and growing businesses as a sales manager, founder, as well as an advisor. So I'm excited to talk to Jenny today about business growth and all things business. Welcome, Jenny. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Well, so I first came to be aware of you about 10 years ago when I implemented SalesView, a company that you were involved with as a lead management and prospecting platform. Now, I understand that not only were you a sort of a founder of SalesView, but you were also the CEO of an appointment setting firm. I'm not sure how you positioned it, but we'll call it an appointment setting firm. You can correct me.
Outsourced lead gen firm. Yep.
Yeah, there you go. Called Lead Gen, which was a great name, by the way. I just got a kick out of that.
Thanks.
So can you tell me a little bit about how SalesView came to be? We started talking about it a little bit before we started recording. I'm just really curious about that story.
Yeah, I mean, it was born out of our own experience that we really needed a platform to give visibility. I think some of it was driven for the need to give visibility to our customers, but also just to get answers ourselves. That one of the things I've always been passionate about is that SDR teams are having the highest volume of live dialogue with the market of any area of the business in most cases, especially as an early market indicator. And so if we're smart, then this volume of effort and dialogue should be garnering information and intelligence. And that information should help frame our strategy. And it's a really important leading indicator, whereas sales is a bit of a lagging indicator. The customer journey beyond sales, once we win a customer, is valuable, but just in a different way. So how can we go answer questions about market opportunity, since it's rarely equal across every opportunity? And how do we answer questions around that and get beyond activity metrics, which was just how many calls we made to get to what results? It was then how do we optimize the calls we're making and get smarter, better, and faster with those for the purpose of our customers and the intelligence that we can provide as a byproduct. So that was a real driver in the building of SalesView initially as a product.
So I see some of the most successful software companies that we work with have a similar origin story, right? They were trying to solve a problem for themselves. So is that really what was going on? You were trying to build something to solve your problem and decided there was a market for it?
Yeah, definitely. That's I think it was actually fairly early prior to some of the big players now, the Sales Lofts and the Outreaches of the world. So,
right. So what was the process for you? Did you immediately go and get a technical co-founder, or did you pay developers to start building it on your own?
A little bit of both. We definitely had an early technologist that was driving a lot of that. We definitely had a very thorough understanding of the business problem and had kind of a natural MVP environment in place. So that made it the early iterations a little easier to get off the ground. But I'd say it was a mix of internal technologists as well as external development resources. So, yeah.
So in 2017, you sold Lead Gen, I think, to Acquirent. So tell me about what was that decision like, selling your company that you had founded and put all of your time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears into? What was that like?
You know, it was a really difficult process to go through. I'll say that it was not a short process, and probably some things that I'll stay away from in terms of things to talk about. But I think most organizations, when you found something with a partner, it's not unusual to get to a place where you're no longer aligned and see some pretty vast differences in the approach to the business. I would also say that, you know, as an entrepreneur in a services business, there's usually what they call a pump and dump or a build and strip. When one person is viewing it as, we want to pump the dollars back in, and another person stripping them all out, it just is, something that is going to create some tension and make it difficult to move forward. So, yeah,
obviously
that was a big driver in that.
Sure. Obviously, alignment between partners is when those things are working really well, it's one of the most powerful things in business, right?
Yeah.
When they're not working together, it can make every day a struggle. So
yes, it definitely got to the point where it felt that way.
I can imagine. So going to someone as a third party to kind of buy out the company was just part of that sort of exit and separation strategy. Yeah.
Yep. It became the right choice.
Yeah. And sometimes that's a really smart choice. Allows everyone to kind of have a win and take something off the table.
Well, and one of the things that I love seeing is that lead gen is some of its original elements that I always believed were very powerful elements of the company are still in place today through Acquirent, and some of the team members that were just phenomenal talents are still in place and still doing great things over there and even accelerating their roles, and that's really fun to see. So something that I love to look in on and kind of admire is that those things are still in place that I always felt really passionate about in how we supported our people. And it's nice to see that they still have a home and one that they're enjoying. So
absolutely. Yeah. The company always had a tremendous reputation in the marketplace. When I talked to people who had done business with lead gen, it was always a positive experience. I think that's phenomenal.
Great.
Obviously you did a great job of leading those people and kind of building a culture there. So talk a little bit about that growth journey. I mean, that was you ran that company for what, 13 years? Something like that?
Yeah. I mean, really, I'd say, gosh, in that 11 to 12 range was operationally where my focus was. But yeah, it was quite a journey of growth. I mean, at the end of the day, growth is contingent on how you view the business and the finances of the business. And so there were certain elements that made it difficult to grow as quickly as I thought we were capable of, based on the relationships that we had established with customers and so forth, which was part of the impediment. But ultimately, I was so proud of the fact that we had customers that had been with us for 8 and 10 years in that journey. And that is almost unheard of in a lead generation environment and an outsourcing environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So was that just a wild hair that you got one day to decide that you were going to start an agency focused on this? And was there a customer that asked you if you'd help them, or how did that work?
Well, the origin story, I had my background prior to leaving school was in sports management. So I worked for the Colts, the Pacers, the Detroit Pistons, and Shock. I worked for some farm teams, USA Track and Field. And when I was leaving school, even though I had all these connections, there were no real positions available. I think there was a ticket sales job up in Detroit. And I just remember thinking, I mean, I'll do ticket sales. I'd done it as an intern, but I'm not going to move to Detroit for it, So, and so I was trying to open up my search for the next position. And I thought I was being really open-minded at the time and said, well, I'll do anything but inside sales, and I'll do anything but work for a tech company, because I was just afraid of technology at the time. That dates me a little bit. But I always thought that I had to know how to code and I had to really understand software. And so that was intimidating to me. And then inside sales, some of my experiences involved having a phone book and being in a trailer behind, that's one of my stories. It's like very much a down by the river story of being in a trailer behind Market Square Arena with white pages in front of me, trying to, make sales and sell season ticket commitments for the Fever. So that was my experience. And it just felt, we weren't even in the building. We were so much of an afterthought. And so I really thought that's what inside sales was. And my first job, I went to a Primo, was able to be an enterprise an enterprise sales environment. I saw how driven everyone was. I saw the team culture. I felt like I got smarter just by being around other people in this company, and built an inside sales organization there, went on to run that organization. It was very predictable in its results, and got recruited away to go build it somewhere else. And when I went to the next place, within 60 days of my hire date, we had hired the team, built the scripts, launched the campaigns, had 6-figure impact on our pipeline creation. And that was a real aha moment for me of, okay, there's a real process here that can be replicated at scale. A year later, that company was bought out. I was not part of that acquisition at that time. So I was considering what to do. My business partner at the time had something going, and I asked and said, hey, I'll help you with this, but I really think there's opportunity over here, and went out and got some deals with Allscripts and Exact Target very early on, who had heard about what I had built in a couple of these other environments and wanted to experience that as well. And that's really what started. It was me on the road consulting for, I think we did 300,000 with me on the road consulting in the first year, and then starting to do a little bit of the outsourcing. And then we kind of renegotiated ownership. The other thing had made no money. And then we went forward from there. So we had a nice little growth trajectory from there.
That's awesome. So you started out by going out and helping people do it themselves, and then offered a way to do it for them.
Yeah. And that's really what I kind of do now is I still think there's a place for outsourced, and I definitely see a lot of opportunities and times when I recommend that for companies. And then there are times where I think it makes sense for them to build in-house. And when they're building in-house, there's still such a big need for process. Many times I see that there are strong managers who are good at training skills, but are not necessarily thinking about scalable process. And that's where I tend to plug in, whether it's on the sales side or whether it's on the SDR side.
So what do you think makes a really successful SDR? What do you look for when you're assessing or recruiting?
Well, several things. I am looking for a reason why this role is purposeful to them, number one. So is this a stepping stone to a sales position? Do they know that they want to be in sales? Are they wanting to be in rev ops? Are they wanting to build a career in customer success? Is it just a fit for them in their lifestyle? I have a very dear friend who's a phenomenal SDR BDR and can command a really high income. And she likes it because it's low stress. She doesn't have to have tons of stress on her plate outside of her work. She kills it on her numbers, and it's a great fit. So first and foremost, all of those are potential to work, but I have to evaluate which of those it is, and does it work in our environment with what we can create? Because if someone says, well, I want to go become a salesperson, and we don't have a path for that, then that might be an impediment to happiness and satisfaction in the role, especially with that particular company. So that's the first thing I talk through. I'd say outside of that, I'm looking for accountability. So I'll usually ask a question about failure and ask what they learned and what part they played. And I'm listening for the word I. Do they say, I could have done this better? I could have learned here. I use that with every sales hire because I do find that accountability is a big part of sales success. If I'm unwilling to take that, then there's a limitation to the role and impact coaching can have. So, and then outside of that, it's motivation. So I'm looking for, typically as someone, I like StrengthsFinder. Are they a competitive mindset or an achiever mindset? Do they compare themselves to themselves? Do they compare themselves to other people? How do they measure success and achievement in their world? So what's really going to motivate them? And then just kind of that empathy card is a tricky one. So I usually would find that if someone was really high empathy and really high harmony, prospecting was going to be tough. Not that that would be a deal breaker in the hire, but that was something that I would go out and talk about pretty candidly with someone about, are you ready for this? Let's talk through some of these scenarios. So those are the primary things that I look for when I'm going through the hiring process for an SDR.
So how do you land on the forever debate of managing SDR metrics versus outcomes? What's the most important factor is, what they produce, or that they're disciplined and working to the KPIs, the activity metrics.
Yeah. So I really try to avoid definitive statements. I'm actually annoyed by definitive statements at this point because I don't think they work. There are always exceptions. My general philosophy and what I've seen the most success with personally is a bottom-up funnel strategy. And that at the end of the day, different people can put in different amounts of work to get to the same outcome. And if I get maniacal about that, it's very difficult to maintain at scale. And then I'm not giving room for the differences and uniqueness in different SDRs. There are some people too that I get frustrated when it's always the right way is to get up early and do this early, or the right way is to always make X number of calls, or always leave a voicemail, or never leave a voicemail. Like, I really try to avoid that stuff. To me, if they're hitting their goals, and I've given upside for them to make additional money beyond that goal, and they are happy hitting their goal and having time back, okay. That's all right. That's fine. There are going to be, everyone has a number in their head where the next dollar is not worth that next level of effort. Some people it's really high, some people it's really low, that they can both be purposeful in success that they contribute for growth. And so I will just say that I tend to focus on that end number. And then I tell my team, if we're not getting to that, then I'm going to talk about these other inputs. And I'm going to talk about, are we really doing enough effort to reasonably assume that we could get to these numbers? Or your peer maybe can do that in 100 calls, but for you, it takes 150 because your conversion is a little lower. So while you're working on that improved conversion, you need to make a few more calls if you're going to compete. And that doesn't mean that necessarily you're bad at what you do. It just means that the inputs are different. I played sports. I had to work a lot harder in basketball than some of my peers to be anywhere near as good as them. Some people that just were naturally gifted, and I mean, they didn't have to put in the same amount of effort, and it's how they were made. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I tend to come at it.
No, I appreciate that perspective. I absolutely agree. I think the conversations that we tend to have with folks is looking at, here's your objective, and if you don't want a lot of scrutiny on the metrics, then just achieve the objective. And because the next place I'm going, if we're not hitting our goals, is we start looking at the details, right?
Yep. So it is important that they know the typical path, and so it is important to know those universally across the team and be able to say, most people that are hitting this outcome consistently are doing these things in this order and with this volume and in this way. So yeah.
So what at the point when you left Lead Gen, how many SDRs did you have on the team there? What did the team at that point?
Lead Gen was very much a part-time model. So we worked with a lot of individuals that had some kind of reason why it was a good fit for them to be with Lead Gen versus going somewhere full-time. We were very flexible in our mindset. So I think at the highest, we were very close to that 90 to 100 total people on the team between our data team and research team and our outbound calling team. So now I had some middle management and support in there too. So those weren't all direct reports to me. But we got quite large, and there was always a little bit of give and take because we really looked at it in terms of the workable hours and how we would distribute those. So that number could be in flux. depending on whether we had individuals that worked a traditional 15-hour-a-week schedule versus some that were a lot closer to 33 hours a week. Obviously, that can really change the dynamic of the number of people if you have a lot more people that are working 33 hours. So, yeah.
Sure. That was sort of pre-virtual too. So I imagine you had a lot of those people in the office.
We did. And it's interesting. I've thought about that a lot. I actually worked for a company, I won't say who, that was very adamantly against work from home. And then COVID hit, and within like 2 months, they had sold their building and took everyone remote. It's like, isn't that just so true? I mean, I heard stories about investors that would say, we're never leaving Carmel, Indiana, and then they're all virtual now. So I really think I had that, mental wall to the virtual environment too, just because we struggled to see people really leave our in-house environment and go to their home environment and succeed. But I will say, even personally, I know I work a lot harder working from my home office than I did in the office, to the point where it was like, man, I have to be social with people, and I don't know how to do that anymore. I'm used to just powering through with work. So I think that'll change a lot. I think it'll make it a really interesting dynamic across the US with the, coasts starting to look at talent in the middle of the country. I think it'll really open up opportunities in smaller communities that haven't existed for a while once industry has left. I just think there's a lot of opportunity for talent there.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think we came to the realization, maybe we were slightly ahead of the curve, probably 3 years or so ago. I just decided that I could find better people if I didn't put an artificial barrier to where they lived, in front of them.
Good for you.
And I was able to get really talented people that just weren't physically able to get to my office. There's a lot of people that live outside of 20 minutes from where you work. And so, that was one of the drivers for us. Of course, we had a catalyst, like all of us. It was not COVID for us, but it was a massive flood here in Houston, Texas. And, the city shut down for a week, and we had already enabled everyone to be virtual, but we didn't really promote virtual work at that point. It was more of an emergency approach, and sent everyone home for the week, and everything kept working, and everyone kept doing what they were doing, and the results were the exact same. I thought, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. So that was sort of like the beginning of it, the thinking to me, like, maybe there's something here. So then I kind of offered people the option, hey, if you want to work from home, work from home. If you want to stay in the office, stay in the office. And some people stayed, some people went home, and I never really saw a dramatic change in the outcomes. And at the end of the day, you got to manage through the outcomes. So
absolutely.
I mean, there's something to be said for culture. We have to try really hard now to make sure that we stay connected and that we're communicating well. I know it's just a new challenge for all businesses today, is figuring out how to do that. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now. I think you've recently begun taking on more of an advisory role, working with tech companies and other companies. Tell me a little bit about what you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, when I left Lead Gen, it very naturally was a step for me to take to help organizations and companies that were trying to build out their internal teams. I always had a passion for more of the sales process. I'm not the next Sandler sales trainer. I'm not doing sales skills training. I'm more of where are we seeing enablement patterns that can help us scale faster? And always was passionate about trying to influence that. I had an opportunity to go to Perk not long after and help them establish their sales team. Pretty strong story there of going from 900,000 in ARR to 6.5 million in 2 years, and a nice little run, and building out an SDR team and an AE team that was really doing, I'd say, pretty traditional B2B SaaS deals, but also with some enterprise opportunities and starting to build out channel. So it's just a really great opportunity for me to put that knowledge to work, and things that I built at Lead Gen as the CEO in sales, I was able to take into a sales leader capacity and put to work. one of the things I'm most proud of there from an onboarding perspective and efficiency is that 100% of our hires as an SDR and an AE got to their first scheduled prospecting win by their first full day of calls. And most times that happened on the 5th day. There was occasion where it might slip into the 6th or 7th day, but in almost every case, that was on the 5th day of their employment. We also had TechPoint here in Indianapolis, which represents the needs of the technology community, recognized that there was a gap in sales talent. So they started something called the TechPoint Sales Bootcamp. And I had I was lucky enough during my consulting to help them frame that out in terms of what that could look like as a program. And I did a small consulting project to help them do that. But then Perk became one of the companies that was the host company for the first several classes that went through. And this would be 15 to 20 people showing up at your doorstep with varying levels of sales background, very little technology sales background, them being at our doorstep, and we had 2 weeks to essentially help them, but also get value. And our first class we put through that came from the boot camp, we did things and how we set things up. We had 59 scheduled demos in 9.5 business days from that group. Once we got even better, we started like shifting how we did that onboarding. We actually got to where they beat 100 in one of the classes. So it was massively impactful, but also showed me a lot about that onboarding process and what that can look like. So that's just something that when I left Perk and consulted, and then I had a customer of mine at the time, which was Curvo, recruit me to run the revenue organization and build it out at Curvo. But that's really where I tend to focus my time with consulting, is not just on the SDR front, but that true end-to-end sales process. Where are there impediments that are keeping us from doing more at scale? Where are we managing to exceptions and anecdotes instead of patterns? And still allowing for exceptions and anecdotes, but really identifying the patterns that can truly be scaled across a lot of personalities. I describe it often like trying to scale art. And when founders are trying to scale their organizations and they've been doing the majority of the selling, it's like taking a salesperson and bringing them in is like setting an artist next to Picasso and saying, paint like this person. Well, we can have the same canvas size, we can have the same materials in front of us, the same paintbrushes, the same paint colors. I can follow and try to mimic how he's mixing his paint, but we get asked to paint a tree and Picasso comes back with an orange rectangle. How does that happen? It's a point of view, and the point of view is incredibly difficult to replicate. It's like trying to replicate Michael Jordan's court vision. Right? We can replicate a lot of the fundamentals that make Michael Jordan great, but can we really replicate fully his competitive spirit, his court vision, these elements that are really difficult to do at scale, or he wouldn't be special, right? And so when we think of art at scale, I often think of wine and canvas, that we've all decided we have the similar materials, we're painting the same picture. We allow for artistic interpretation to adjust colors or add a tree or a bird or whatever. But generally, when we all hold up our painting at the end, it's all generally the same, with small differences when we look closely. And we achieve scale when we meet the needs of the people that want to come to class and know how to paint and what to paint, while allowing for other people to say, I'm going to paint my own picture now. And when we achieve and meet the needs of both of those types of personalities, that's when we can actually scale successfully. So that's what I love to get involved in, where I tend to focus my time. So,
are you working with exclusively technology companies today, or is there a certain segment you like to work in?
Well, I definitely have a passion for helping this stage from kind of the angel to seed to Series A is where I see a significant amount of my business, a lot in technology. I definitely have a passion for that, but man, everything across the B2B spectrum of technology is usually a good fit for me. But I still take on some different projects. I helped a company right before their IPO right before I joined Curvo with a funnel analysis and kind of a pipeline analysis where they were really tripped up in their marketing process and how they were reporting. So we were able to solve that. So yeah, I do quite a few different types of creative projects, but I definitely have some that are very packaged up on the sales and SDR front.
So the last thing, I always like to leave CEOs with listeners, business leaders and CEOs that tune in, with something really tangible that they can take away and apply to their business right away. And a lot of times that's just a mindset thing, or maybe it's a metric or something that you look at right away. So, not to put you on the spot, but when you walk into if you were to walk into a B2B technology company today, what are some of maybe the 2 or 3 first questions that you might ask a CEO to really understand where the opportunity might be? That's a fair question.
Yeah, I'm going to ask where they feel like the conversion is struggling in their revenue funnel. So even on a gut basis, where do you feel like, because usually their gut's fairly accurate. Maybe they haven't backed it up with data, but I'd say 80% of the time it's pretty accurate what that gut is. So where do they feel like the impediment is? I'm going to ask some whys around that. I'd say the other thing that I'm always curious about is just understanding the math of the go-to-market model based on their ACV. So what is the structure of their average contract value, typical ARR, typical MRR? How are they measuring that, and what does that look like? Because it tells a lot about what kind of cost per lead can we really justify in this go-to-market, and what type of environment are we working in to build an organization. Let's see, outside of that, I'd also say I ask questions fairly commonly about comp when they're having sales performance issues, because I do find comp to be a challenge. And it's amazing to me when there's a mindset that my salespeople shouldn't make money. And that is one of the very reasons why they're struggling, most likely. So there are a lot of process things we can fix, but that's a big one. So I see SDR teams that are comped on revenue on a 6-month sales cycle. It's like they can't tie that back to their daily work in any way. When I see, I think there are a lot of times when one of the biggest reasons salespeople leave is that they feel capped, so that we're not really thinking strategically about the ability to make money, or we have really high quotas, which is usually when I advise sales reps to ask questions about who has achieved this quota before to know that it's relevant. And how did you come up with the logic if you don't have that proof? Because unachieved quotas, then you really have someone who's not hitting OTE and is probably dissatisfied. So that's the other thing that I ask a lot about.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. I think one of the things that I've just come to know is just an absolute truth is that compensation drives behavior. And so if you're not getting the behavior you want out of your sales team, that's the first place I go and look. Like, okay, well, what are you paying them to do? This is interesting. You want one behavior, but you're paying them to do another behavior. So the compensation is going to win that internal debate.
Absolutely.
And by the way, you might as well save your time and energy trying to convince people to do something that you're not paying them to do while you're paying them to do the opposite. So just save your own energy, align your expectations with the compensation, and then you can free up your own cycles to do more meaningful work than walking around with a big stick trying to drive a behavior that you're not paying for. So it's and that's not even a sales thing, right? I mean, that's customer service, that's management, it's executive teams, it's everything. If you're not getting the behavior you want, look at the compensation first. What are you actually paying people to do?
Yep.
So I think that's incredibly insightful. Thanks for sharing that.
Of course.
Well, Jenny, I Told you we'd keep this short and sweet. So I thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insight with us. Hey, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? People might want to.
I'd say LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm very responsive on LinkedIn within a day for sure. Jenny Vance. So look me up by my maiden name versus my married name. It's way more difficult. And then I'm very responsive on LinkedIn messaging. It's the fastest, easiest way, and I'll be in touch.
That's perfect. Well, we'll include your information in the show notes with our website where we post the episode, so you can find it there as well. So before I wrap up, I want to take a minute and thank all the new people who've started to follow the podcast. It's exciting to see the momentum, and it's inspiring for me to continue to find great people like Jenny to talk business with. So thank you for that. If you like the conversation today, I'd be grateful if you could give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. Taking a few seconds to do that has a huge impact on our ability to reach more and more people with these great stories and interviews. So thank you for that. And like I always say, thanks for listening. And remember, B2B companies grow faster when they focus on the big three. Thanks. Have a great day.
Pro Sales Connection is a sales and marketing firm that has been helping B2B companies grow faster since 2009. Learn more about our proprietary fastest path to revenue process for B2B companies. Experiencing the possibilities begins with a short 15-minute call. Schedule yours at www.prosalesconnection.com and click Get Started.